On the last episode of the Keepsake box. Friday rolled around and it was finally time for me to retrieve my car from the mechanic. Antonio picked me up from my house that morning. He took me to pick up my check and to the bank to cash it. We arrived at the maintenance garage and the mechanic showed me that the repairs had been completed. We walked inside and the mechanic walked behind the desk. "That'll be $325, he said. $325? I exclaimed. "But you told me that the repairs would cost $250. The mechanic retrieved my keys from the counter, ensuring that I couldn't run off without paying. "The price is the price," he said. The tears immediately pooled into my eyes. I had a total of $378 to my name. I would be left with $53 out of my check, with 2 more weeks before I would be receiving another. I started reaching into my purse to retrieve the money, but Antonio placed his hand on top of mine, a universal request to cease action. He reached into his pocket and handed the mechanic 4 crisp $100 bills. He snatched the keys from the mechanic's hand and motioned for me to follow him outside. Antonio walked me to my car. He opened the door and gestured for me to sit. "People respect you differently when they know you got it." That's what he said to me. Antonio handed me my keys, and I turned on the ignition. Unexpectedly, the sound of "Where Do Broken Hearts Go" started blaring through the speakers, the result of me having listened to the tape on the last occasion that I had driven my car. Antonio laughed. "Are you really listening to that?" he asked. I exclaimed, "Yes, I am. This is my favorite song in the entire world." Antonio laughed, but complimented me on my taste in music. He said, "You have an old soul, little girl. I like that." And that was the first time he addressed me as little girl. Antonio pulled out his wallet and passed me a business card. He smiled as he addressed me. "Call me if you need anything." Anything. There was something about the way he repeated the word anything. It was like subliminal messaging, like he needed me to understand that he was accessible to me under any circumstances. Something about that appealed to me. After giving me his business card and making me understand that it wasn't a rote gesture on his behalf, Antonio handed me $200. "Buy yourself something nice," he said. Right that moment, I felt that things were going to go further between us. I was impressed by the way Antonio carried himself. I was also impressed by the way people responded to him. He was so self-assured and confident. I liked that about him. It wasn't specifically about the money, although the money didn't hurt. It was that feeling. It was the same feeling that I had when I saw Ken at my locker for the first time. Something pulled me towards him. It wasn't a choice. Chapter 3, Mixed Signals. Narrated by Shandora Warren. Music by Epidemic Sound. The next day was a Saturday. I awoke at 6 o'clock and went to the salon to work with Sharon. Sharon and I went about our usual routines. We chatted and I did Cassidy's hair. Late in the day, a lady walked in without an appointment. Typically, Sharon would allow me to service the walk-ins. She had an established clientele and didn't really need the extras. I was usually excited for the opportunity to make a few extra bucks, but that walk-in made me incredibly nervous. Why? Because it was Cream. Without speaking, Cream bypassed Sharon and walked over to me. "You got time for a walk-in?" she asked. I smiled stiffly and gestured for her to have a seat. I felt incredibly guilty. I knew that Cream was romantically involved with Antonio, and if I had to be honest, I knew that I was a bit conflicted about my feelings for him as well. For some reason, I felt as if Cream could smell the infatuation on me, and that made me uncomfortable. Cream retrieved a magazine from her purse and showed me a picture of the hairstyle she wanted. I studied the photo, figuring out the best way to execute the style. Cream smiled, displaying a small diamond in her right canine tooth. She was so flashy, but I loved it. I felt that she carried herself in the way that I would if I were slightly more confident. I could tell that she knew exactly who she was and she was comfortable in her own skin. I both loved and envied that. The interaction between Cream and I became more comfortable. We chatted like old friends. Cream was pleasant, but I got the impression that she wasn't very smart, educationally. If I have to be honest, her speech was incomprehensible at times. I found that it was difficult to understand some of the things that she was attempting to say. I carried on with the conversation, nonetheless, hoping to gain some understanding of the situation at hand. I had so many questions. I wondered how she came to be involved with Antonio. I wondered if she knew that Peaches was dealing with him as well. Obviously, that wasn't the time or place to ask. Then again, was there ever an appropriate time to ask those questions? I completed Cream's hairstyle, impeccably, might I add. She removed an envelope from her purse and passed it over to me. She advised me that she hadn't looked into the envelope, but she was sure that there was enough money to cover her service. That's another reason why I questioned Cream's intelligence. The envelope wasn't sealed. I didn't understand why she hadn't looked inside. I certainly would have. I opened the envelope to display its contents. Even though I had only charged Cream $50 for her hairstyle, Antonio had sent $250. There was also a note neatly folded in half. That note was like fire in my hands. Sharon was several stations away, but in my mind, she was able to see exactly what was written on that piece of paper. I guess it was that spiritual conviction that Grandma always talked about. That note could easily have said, "Have a nice day." But because I was conflicted about my feelings for Antonio, I internalized some guilt over its contents. I unfolded the note. I don't have to tell you that it didn't say, "Have a nice day." The note said, "I hope you bought yourself something nice. Let's go out tonight. Call me." My heart was nearly thumping out of my chest. So it wasn't just me. Antonio felt something too. I stuck the money and the note into the pocket of my smock. I decided to revisit the matter at a more convenient time. I quietly finished my shift and headed home. I thought about Antonio's note for the entire drive. Without a shadow of a doubt, I was very much aware that I was wrong for even considering Antonio's proposal. Sharon was the only friend that I had, and she had been good to me. Not only had she taken me in without any responsibility to do so, but she had also provided me with an opportunity to make money. She took an active role in my betterment. Even after I ducked out on her for Ken, she still allowed me to come back to the salon. Sharon inconvenienced herself to ensure that I had a ride to work. She didn't have to do any of those things, but she had done them with no problem, even without having to be asked. Those facts alone should have made the situation easy. Yet, it didn't. Just like the situation with Ron and Ken, I saw the benefits of dealing with Antonio. I was young and impressionable when the situation with Ron was in play. I was impressed by the fact that Ron bought me jeans and told me that I was pretty. Also being young, I was impressed by the fact that Ken provided a place for me to live and bought me a car. At 18, with considerably more responsibility, I desired different things. However, my mindset was the exact same. In the week that I had been exposed to Antonio, he had spent $800 on me. That had all happened without me having to do anything or even ask. Something in me wondered what I could get if there was a legitimate effort put forth. I knew that my thought process was flawed, but things weren't easy for me, and I would be lying if I said that money wasn't a motivating factor. I was attending community college and had every reason to believe that I would be starting a university shortly thereafter. More advanced education would require more money. I was fortunate to have had the benefit of Grandma's house, so I didn't have the expense of housing. But books and tuition were expensive. I had a little time to save, but I knew that I would still be financially burdened. Thinking it out, I was already aware that Antonio was dealing with both Peaches and Cream. It was obvious that he was going to cheat on Sharon without regards to my position either way. Why shouldn't I capitalize on his desire to be generous? but my conscience intervened. I thought about how uncomfortable it would be to see Sharon every day, knowing that I was dealing with Antonio. I thought about how hurt she would be if she found out that I had betrayed her. It was crazy for me to even take Antonio's advances into consideration. Deep down, I knew that there was a difference. Neither Peaches nor Cream had a connection to Sharon. Being Sharon's friend, I knew that I owed it to her to be respectful of the relationship that she shared with Antonio, even if he wasn't. I dismissed it. It was crazy. I got home and prepared for a night of television and studying. After wrapping my hair and showering, I threw on my favorite sweatpants. I removed my contact lenses and put on my glasses. Looking in the mirror, I wondered why being comfortable was always synonymous with being ugly. I went into the closet and retrieved my favorite blanket. It was plush and comfortable, but most of all, it was Ken's. I had taken it from his house on the day that he was arrested, along with several other items that belonged to him. Occasionally, I sprayed the blanket with Ken's cologne when it started to wear off. I hadn't washed it since I had taken it from his house. It's crazy, I know, but I missed Ken. The situation was still fresh, and I thought about him a lot. I pulled out the keepsake box that was given to me by Ken. I looked at our pictures and began to cry. I wondered how a situation with so much promise had gone awry. Things could have been different. They should have been. The thoughts bombarded my mind. Ken had turned to drugs and alcohol to cope with his life. Unfortunately for both of us, Ken was a different person when he was under the influence. Altered Ken was mean. Altered Ken was ruthless and violent. Altered Ken had raped me when my mind was too immature to even conceive of what was happening. As far as I was concerned, Ken wasn't really the problem. My Ken would have been different if his life had been different, if his parents had been more stable, if he hadn't lost his older brother to violence, if someone had tried to help him instead of just locking him away. If. Even though my relationship with Ken was unhealthy, I still saw the good in him. I still loved him. I imagined Ken fixing himself in prison and coming home to me. I didn't know how much time he had received, but I figured I would be out of school by the time he was released. He could move in with me, and I would help him get himself together. In my mind, that would be perfect. I could be with Ken without the disservice of him having control of my living situation. But that was only plausible if he could forgive me. In my mind, Ken had gone to prison because of me, twice. I didn't know if we could survive that. Deep down, I didn't think that we could. I put the box away, deciding to watch television and eat ice cream in lieu of studying. Reviewing the contents of the keepsake box had completely taken away my desire to be productive. Just as I was getting comfortable, there was a knock at the door. Without verification, I immediately knew that it was Sharon. I didn't have much company, and Sharon was the only person who made a habit of coming unannounced. Making matters worse, she had a key. Sharon was notorious for leaving her keys in the car. Somehow, she always deemed it more convenient to knock like the police instead of going back to the car to get her keys. I left her at the door for a while, hoping that she would get the hint. Since that was not to be the case, I reluctantly decided to answer the door. I flung it open, fully prepared to confront Sharon on her lack of consideration. But upon opening the door, it was I who was met with confrontation. I was surprised to see that it wasn't Sharon, but Antonio at the door. As a general rule, I find it audacious and intrusive to show up unannounced. I think it shows a basic lack of consideration to arrive without confirmation that your company is desired. This is a concern that should have been expressed to Antonio, as it is important to establish boundaries. But I didn't express my concerns. I simply stepped aside and allowed him to enter. Once inside, Antonio presented 2 bags and placed them on my living room table. He explained that my decision to not reach out to him had resulted in the assumption that I would rather stay in opposed to going out. Again, he was audacious and intrusive, but I allowed him to be so. Antonio removed the contents of the bag. He passed me a plastic food container and a wrapped cylindrical object that I unmistakably knew to be an egg roll. I opened the container. General Tso chicken with extra sauce, lo mein with no onions, and extra broccoli, just like I liked it. I looked up to see Antonio displaying a huge grin. I smiled as well. Antonio often ordered food for us when I lived with Sharon, and while I was very specific about the way I liked things, he always managed to get it right. I was under the impression that my elaborate handwritten instructions had made that task easier, but with no prompts or instructions, Antonio had managed to remember the minutest of details. Ken hadn't ever taken the time to do that. I could tell right away that Antonio was observant and attentive. I liked that about him. Antonio and I had an effortless exchange of entertaining subject matter. He was witty and funny. I knew why Sharon liked him, and I immediately knew that I would be willing to entertain his company on a consistent basis. In the blink of an eye, it was 11 o'clock. Antonio arose, indicating that it was time for him to leave. He smiled, a genuine smile. Something about his smile made me smile. It was warm and inviting. Antonio gave me a hug without expressing a desire for anything intimate, not even a kiss. Admittedly, I was confused. So maybe I had pegged the situation incorrectly. The fact that Antonio hadn't made any advances caused me to second guess the entire situation. Maybe he was just looking out for me at Sharon's request. Maybe she had arranged a free meal in the same way that she had arranged for my transportation from work. Considering those as options made me feel awful about my lust towards Antonio. Why had I ever considered betraying Sharon? Even more, why would Antonio betray Sharon by dealing with someone so close to her? The whole thing sounded crazy after I thought about it. I decided to dismiss all thoughts of Antonio and get back to the business of living my life. I didn't know where we stood, but I had no desire to deal with Antonio's mixed messages or my mixed feelings. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Shenny Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in purchasing books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Thank you for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.